What if everything you've been told about God is wrong? What if the most sacred text in human history contains a secret so explosive that it's been hidden in plain sight for over 2,000 years? You're about to discover something that will shatter everything you think you know about creation, about our origins, and about who really made us. For millennia, we've been told that God created man in His image. But there's a problem, a massive problem that theologians have been desperately trying to explain away. The word God in that sentence was never singular. In the original Hebrew text of Genesis, we find this word Elohim. Listen to that ending, im. In Hebrew, this is the masculine plural form, always, without exception, just like seraphim for multiple seraphim, like cherubim for multiple cherubim, like goyim for multiple nations. The ancient Hebrew scribes had perfectly good singular options. They could have used El, they could have used Eloah, they could have used El Shaddai, but they didn't. They chose Elohim, the plural, again and again and again. Modern translators claim this is just a plural of majesty, a grammatical quirk to show God's greatness. But here's what they don't want you to know. The Hebrew language already had established ways to indicate majesty and supremacy. These scribes were meticulous craftsmen. Every letter carried meaning. Every grammatical choice was deliberate. So why would they risk confusion? Why use a plural noun for a singular being? Unless there was no confusion to risk, unless the plurality was exactly what they intended to convey. But if Elohim really was plural, then who were they talking to when they said, "Let us make man"? Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. This may be the most explosive verse in the entire Bible. Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam betzalmenu kidmutenu. Let me break this down for you, word by word. Vayomer, and they said, Elohim, the plural we discussed. But here's where it gets interesting. Na'aseh, let us make, not let me make, not I will make, but na'aseh, let us make. Betzalmenu, in our image, not in my image, but in our image. Kidmutenu, according to our likeness. The entire construction is plural. There's no ambiguity, no room for creative interpretation. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. For centuries, theologians have scrambled to explain this away. Some say God was talking to angels. Others claim it's the Trinity having a conversation. Still others suggest God was deliberating with himself. But let's think critically. If God were speaking to angels, why would he say, "in our image"? Are humans created in the image of both God and angels? If it's the Trinity, why does this concept appear nowhere else in Hebrew Scripture? If it's self-deliberation, why doesn't Hebrew use its specific grammatical constructions for that? What we find is direct plural address, the language of consultation, of collective decision-making, of group deliberation. But here's the strangest part. Immediately after this plural declaration, verse 27 switches to singular. So God created man in his own image. It's as if the decision was made collectively, but the execution was carried out by one specific member of the group. This pattern repeats throughout Genesis. At Babel, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language." In Genesis 3:22, "Behold, the man has become like one of us," like one of us. What kind of supreme deity needs to consult with others before acting? And who exactly were these others? Just a few miles east of ancient Israel, in Mesopotamia, we find something remarkable. Stories that are almost identical to Genesis, but written centuries earlier. The Sumerian texts, the Akkadian epics, the Babylonian chronicles, They all describe divine beings who operate in councils, who make collective decisions, who have hierarchical structures. The Anunnaki, literally those who from heaven came to earth, appear throughout Mesopotamian literature as a group of divine beings who gather in council to decide humanity's fate. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, we read of a council of deities that deliberates before every major decision. The Atrahasis epic tells of a council that decided to create humans as workers. These weren't isolated myths. They were widespread, consistent accounts of divine administration. Across cultures, across centuries. Abraham came from Ur in Mesopotamia. The patriarchs knew these stories. They were familiar with these concepts. What if they weren't inventing new theology? What if they were simply preserving what they had inherited? What if they were reporting rather than creating? Consider the archaeological evidence. The Sumerian king list speaks of rulers who came down from heaven and established civilization. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes beings who possessed knowledge beyond human comprehension. These texts describe divine beings who had physical forms, who traveled between heaven and earth, who established cities and civilizations. This isn't the abstract metaphysical deity of later theology. This is something concrete, physical, administrative. But if Elohim was genuinely plural, a group rather than an individual, then who was in charge? Who made the final decisions? This is where another crucial Hebrew term becomes significant: Yahweh. In the biblical text, a figure emerges who is often distinguished from the other Elohim. This isn't a generic title. It's a specific name, a particular identifier. Think of it this way. Imagine a corporate structure. The Elohim would be the board of directors. Yahweh might have been the CEO, but if this is true, then what does that make us? Their employees? Their creation? Or something else entirely? This organizational model explains many puzzling aspects of the biblical text. Consider Psalm 82. Elohim stands in the divine assembly. In the midst of the gods, he renders judgment. Here we see Yahweh standing in an assembly of divine beings and rendering judgment upon them. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? This doesn't sound like a God talking to himself. This sounds like a chief executive calling his subordinates to account. Even more revealing is Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. When the Most High divided the nations, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. This passage suggests a territorial division among the Elohim. Each divine being was assigned a specific region, a particular people group. Yahweh received Israel as his designated territory, his area of responsibility. This isn't monotheism as we understand it. This is management structure, administrative hierarchy, a system of delegated authority over human populations. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserve even more explicit versions of these passages. They speak of the sons of God and the Watchers as distinct entities with specific roles and territories. What if the ancient world wasn't describing theology as we understand it today? What if they were documenting actual organizational structures? What if they were reporting on real administrative systems? This perspective explains why divine beings in these accounts have such human-like characteristics: emotions, conflicts, mistakes, learning curves. It explains why they seem to operate within organizational constraints rather than with unlimited power. What does all this mean? Perhaps our translations have simplified a more complex reality. Perhaps the ancients weren't describing abstract theology, but concrete chronicle. The next time you hear about the creation of man, remember, in the original Hebrew text, it wasn't the work of one alone. It was a collective decision, a group project. The question that remains is, a group of what? Of whom? And why have we been taught to see singularity where the text clearly indicates plurality? These aren't just linguistic curiosities. They're clues to a different understanding of our origins, an understanding that might have been more literal than we've been led to believe. The truth has been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. The question is, are you ready to see it?